Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 17 of In the 11. Today, in the 11, we are discussing why abroad. Why do I choose to pursue this dream overseas, in Europe for me right now, and why do I choose that versus trying to become a professional footballer over here in the United States? I get asked this question quite often, really, from friends, family, and the like, so I figured it would be a good topic to address here on the podcast and talk about some of the reasons why I'm choosing to do it and why I'm taking the route that I am. So without further ado, let's get rolling. Before we get back into that, let me just address, since I'm back here on the solo podcast game, I've been away for a little while. We've been doing the guests, which has been amazing. We've gotten so much good feedback from a lot of the guests that we've had, but I wanted to kind of interject in the rhythm that we had with the guests and pop in and talk about a topic and kind of get back to what I really started this podcast for, was for me to come on and address things that I want to talk about and talk about my journey, talk about my dream and all those sorts of things. But with that being said, let me say how appreciative I am of the growth of the podcast and how much love we have received, especially recently with the episodes that we've put out. People have really enjoyed them. People have enjoyed the content, and it's showing in the number of people who are consuming the podcast, but also who are now starting to get involved with the Instagram page and all those types of things, and it just means a lot to me. So I want to say how appreciative I am of that, and I hope that can continue. And with that being said as well, the last guest that we just had on, Khedive, who, if you haven't checked out that episode yet, make sure you go and do that, because it's an incredible one to hear his story. I was really honored because he sort of spoke to me about being on this podcast, first of all, prior to it happening, and then we sort of still stayed in touch afterward as it's gone up, and he has said, and I don't want to reveal anything for him, but basically he had just said he's working on a pretty cool project, and he's excited to kick that off. And he told me that because he watched me come and do this podcast and kind of build this brand and try and grow something, that gave him the last little push to go ahead and really go all in with this project and go for it. And I've had a couple of different people say things like that to me, that they had an idea and they had a thought that they have always been wanting to do or wanting to pursue some sort of dream, and maybe it's something like this where it's sort of a social media platform or broadcast like endeavor, which is a little bit frightening and daunting at times, to have yourself be on camera and to hear your voice all the time. I've had people say things like that to me, that they've been a little bit nervous or cautious about doing it, but seeing me do it and seeing me take the leap has given them that last incentive and that last push to have no fear and no qualms with just going for it. And that is so awesome to me, and that is, a big thing that I try and do in this podcast. I talk a lot about soccer and football and me trying to pursue that dream and how that looks for me, but really I try and cater this podcast to anyone who is chasing a dream. That's really what it's about, and it can be football related. As I said, I keep it that way because that's what I know, and I try and provide value in that area. But I hope when you listen to what I'm saying in the context of trying to become a professional footballer, you understand that there's little things that you can pick out there, and there's moments that you can extract and apply that to another field as well. And you don't have to listen to this podcast simply if you are trying to become a professional footballer as well. If you are someone who likes a good story and wants to chase a dream, then I think this is a place where you can call home as well. This is a community and a piece of content that will hopefully be applicable to your life as well. So just shouts out to Khadib for letting me know that. Shouts out to a couple of other people who have said similar things of that nature, and that's awesome to me, and I hope I can continue to do that, and I can continue to inspire some people and motivate some people and all that sort of good stuff. So without further ado, let's get into the topic of today's episode. So you've seen the title, Why Abroad? Right? Why do I, as an American, decide that the best route for me to try and become a professional is overseas? And I'm going to break this down for you in a couple of different ways. For me, a lot of it is just based on what I feel, what I notice, and where I think the best possibility and best opportunity for me is. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, and I'm going to touch upon some statistical reasons that kind of back my choosing, back my reasoning behind wanting to go abroad. And I'm also going to talk kind of about just my opinion, right? What I've seen from playing in the United States for a number of years, watching the professional landscape from afar, and just how I think I fit in or don't fit into the mold that's been created in U.S. soccer. So I think the big thing to kind of start off, that it might be the most important reason why I think abroad is the best way to go for a player who doesn't have opportunities knocking at their door in the United States. The culture in Europe specifically, but really globally, is their sport is football, right? It is soccer. It's what is lived and it is breathed, especially in countries like Germany, where I was, England, Spain, Italy, all these countries across Europe. Football is, it has its own language, it has its own pulse, it is a living, breathing organism, and it is played by countless people, millions of people. There's hundreds and thousands of teams of all levels spread across the countries. And I'm not necessarily saying that the United States system of having so many sports that are so popular is a bad thing. I think it's great. I think it's what makes our country so unique. But the reality of the situation is that in the United States, the most popular sports are American football, basketball, and then from there, I haven't really looked at the numbers, but you could probably argue, baseball is next, maybe hockey, MLS sort of start to all intertwine in that 3 through 5 range. But as a sport, soccer, I don't think it's ever really feasible for us to compete from a popularity, from a participation standpoint with those big two of American football and basketball. So, for example, in the United States, about 8 to 9% of children aged 6 to 12, this study said, participated in outdoor youth soccer. You compare that to England, age 5 to 10, 31.4% of aged 5 to 10, as I said, were participating in soccer. That number goes up to 44.7% aged 10 to 15. So there's kind of two ways that you look at that. Is you look at, yes, there's more players playing the game in Europe or in England, so does that make the competition that much harder because there's more players in the pool? Maybe, but partially the way I look at it is, again, back to my original point, there's more players, there's more popularity within the game, there's more players playing the game, and while that can be daunting from an opportunity standpoint, from a perspective of there's going to be so much drive and desire to play the game at the highest level, there's going to be teams that sprout up everywhere in order to accommodate that supply, so to speak, right? So there's going to be a demand for teams because you have this many players that all want to play the game at a high level, and the supply is there because there's enough players to field teams across the country. And we'll sort of get into that as we move on down through some of the statistics that I am bringing to the table here, right? Because you look at a place like the United Kingdom, which has a population of 66.65 million people, roughly, and there are 89 fully professional teams. 89 fully professional teams for 66.65 million. And that doesn't even count the fifth division, when we start to get into non-league, because the top four divisions, that's what that embodies. Those 89 teams are in the Premier League, the Championship, Football League 1, and Football League 2. As you now get into non-league, which I believe fifth division is called Conference North, Conference South, and you start to go down the ladder a little bit, if you play fifth division football in England, from those that I've talked to that have been around that level, most of those teams they're not sanctioned fully professional, but they're basically fully professional, and there may be one or two factors that make them a step below a League 2 team, but more or less you're going to be in a very professional environment. You might be getting close to professional wages, and it's going to be a high level of football. Now, you compare that to the United States, where we have a population of 328.2 million people, roughly. And our number of fully professional soccer teams is right about 80. I was doing the research, and there's a new league that's called NISA, which is still a bit confusing to me, which teams are actually in it and which are not in it. And there is a trajectory for growth both in that league and some of the leagues above it, with MLS having a couple of expansion teams. I think by 2022 there will be 2 to 3 more MLS teams, so that number is growing. But just from that pure statistical standpoint of how many people there are in the country and how many teams, how many jobs there are in this specific region, it doesn't really add up. And then you start to look at, when we get into the semi-professional levels, those semi-professional levels aren't as sanctioned, aren't as structured, and really there isn't semi-professional soccer in the United States the way that it is in Europe or overseas. It just doesn't exist in the same format. Okay, so we've established that, at least from my perspective, the way that I'm viewing it, there are a plethora of people playing the game that want opportunities in the United States, but there's really not a fully formed market yet for all of the leagues and for professional teams and professional contracts out there. Now, the other reason why this gets tricky is because then you start to look at the composition and the makeup of each league. So you look at a league like the MLS. According to Transfermarkt, which is a site that essentially tracks transfers and values of players and leagues and competitions and things of that nature, 57% of the MLS players are foreign-based players. That be designated player, spot on the team, or just a foreign roster spot in the team. Then you get to the USL Championship, which is the second division, which has 42% of the league is foreign players. Again, pretty high number, especially for a second division league. Now, I was using England as the example before. As we know, the Premier League in England is highly foreign. As I was doing this research, the only leagues that I were able to find that were comparable to the MLS is in fact the Premier League, which is more foreign. However, there's a lot of factors that go into why that league is more foreign. A lot of it's money-based, and that's maybe a podcast for another topic, or a podcast for another day. And then the only other league I found that was even close was Italy, which was right about the same percentage of foreign players. And that's only in the top level. As you get to the second divisions, those numbers, those percentages start to go way down. So, if I use La Liga, for example, the league in Spain, 38.2% at the top level are foreign players. When you get to La Liga 2, 27.5% are foreign, which means, upwards of 70-80% of the league is Spanish-based. So what that tells me is that the United States, we often go and outsource the players that we're looking for. The players that we're looking to bring into our clubs, we often are looking overseas to find them. We're not looking within our own borders. You even look at this in the college soccer example, and I started to see this as I started coaching. Everyone spends all their money on who? It's not the domestic guys, it's the foreign guys. Now, is that, from a strictly financial perspective, does that make more sense? Because a foreign player would oftentimes need more money because they aren't offered the same things in terms of financial aid and FAFSA as a domestic player? Sure. However, the more important part of the discussion is where you're initially starting that search. If you already know that you're going to be outsourcing your talent from overseas, and that's where your head's at from the beginning, that sends a clear message for those players that are playing domestically. And that is seen across the professional leagues as well, is we go outside of our borders to look for the players that we really want, that we think are going to make our team special. We are less likely to do it in the States, in the confines of our own 50 here. So, now, with that being said, that's not me saying, oh, the MLS has to give more chance to domestic players, the USL has to give more chance to domestic players. As I mentioned before, the Premier League has a number of foreign players. You look at the top teams in the Premier League, there's not a ton of English players sprinkled throughout those lineups. So you can decide as a business model if that's what you want to do. I have no issue with that, but this is why I'm describing, these are some of the reasons, some of the case that I'm making why I've decided maybe the US isn't the best place for me to try and practice my trade, try and build my craft here. So, furthering on that same topic of 57% foreign, right? When you start to look at the players that they are bringing in domestically, that number starts to narrow and narrow even more. The way the system sort of used to be designed in the United States was that players would come up through club soccer, they would go into college soccer, and then they would go on into the MLS draft and then begin their professional career from there. And the reason why that was our system and is still our system is because we're sort of caught in between two minds now. We have a certain group of pioneers and soccer minds that are pushing and pushing and pushing to try and get closer to the European model, and we have the same people that are also very used to the traditional American way of playing sports, right? You look at the other sports that I mentioned at the top that are the most popular: basketball, football, baseball. What's the system that they all use is a draft system, and it's worked for them, and it's how it works. So we're caught in between these two minds of, do we have to stay true to culturally what we do in terms of our sports, or do we go with what works? And so now is where I'll get into where we're kind of caught in between two minds. So with the evolution of the draft, the other component that's been added to this is MLS have started academies, and this has been going on for a number of years, but the particular thing that's now important is the emphasis on homegrown players and MLS academies signing their homegrown players. So if you play for an MLS academy and you are good enough to play at the professional level, whether it be right now or whether it be you go to college for a year, now there's some technicalities in terms of the legality of it and exactly how you do it and when you sign and all these types of things, but essentially the MLS can retain your rights as a homegrown player. If they choose to sign you at 16, 17, you choose to sign that contract, then you can then forego college and you can step right into the professional game. Same being said, there's been players who have played in MLS academies, they've gone to college for a year, then they've done well, the club is ready to sign them, and they sign after a year of college. If you notice, that's different than the sport model in other sports. In basketball, you have to play college basketball for at least a year. Unless you go overseas to play, you cannot go directly from high school anymore to the professional game, to the NBA. You have to go to college first. Football, I know that there's a requirement. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 years for college football before you can be drafted into the NFL. So you see that difference in soccer, and the motivation now for clubs would be to develop players themselves and then sign them to homegrown contracts. Because, so again, you're starting to do that math, right? 57% of the rosters, or not the roster, 57% of the players are foreign. Now, the next best method for you to gain domestic talent is from your own academies, from your own backyard. Pick the players that you think are ready and have that be the makeup of your domestic component of your team. Now the last piece of it, as I mentioned, is the draft. So the draft it's now a place where very few teams really use it as a building tool or a development tool for them to bring players in, but it is a tool, and and there have been players who have done very well that have been drafted. And so there's 2 points that I want to talk about with the draft. The first being that now what it's come to be is not what it used to be. And what I mean by that is, so there was an article published in 2018 from Soccer America's research, which uncovered that fewer than 25% of those drafted in the last 3 years are with MLS teams now. That was written in 2018. So meaning from 2015 to 2018, all the players who were drafted, fewer than 25% of them, as of that 2018-2019 season, were still in the league, in MLS, the top flight. Now, if I had to guess, that number has only gone down in the subsequent years following that. So you have that, where that draft, that route, isn't really even the most feasible way for you to get to the top level. Couple that with the fact that if you're a player like myself, who plays Division II, who doesn't get a lot of notoriety, who has a very average, or maybe some would even say below average college soccer career, and I have no buzz whatsoever of going to the draft, now you start to look at, okay, what is a feasible option for me to get into the professional game in the United States? Because as I mentioned, the three main ways teams are getting players: they're shopping abroad, they're developing players in their MLS academies, and they are drafting to maybe fill out a couple of other spots. You start to look at the lower leagues as well. A lot of teams in the leagues are MLS Academy second teams. So, for example, Red Bulls and Philadelphia Union, they all have a second team that plays in the USL. Those teams are going to be pretty much comprised of solely players from their academy that they feel are maybe in between that jump of playing for the MLS side and playing in their U19 academies. So when they've sort of outgrown the U19 level, then they place them into the USL. Once they've outgrown that, then it's time to go up to the MLS. So now you're eliminating some of those opportunities where if you're not a player who grew up in the Red Bull system, and especially if you're not a player who's, under 21, you're probably not going to play for New York Red Bulls too. So by process of elimination, you start to kind of remove opportunities that are even eligible for someone like myself. Now, there's a couple things that I want to address here. I mentioned how, an example like La Liga or another domestic league that has a high percentage of domestic-based players. So in La Liga, Spain is comprised of, almost 65% Spanish players. So that means, for me as an American, that makes it much more difficult for me to earn a contract in that country. That's very true. And that's also a hindrance to why go abroad, right? It's incredibly difficult to sign as a foreigner. It's more difficult because you have to acquire a visa and you have to establish working papers and residency and all those sorts of things. And when doing that and traveling, it's not always the easiest thing. As I'm laying out all these points for you, I want to make it crystal clear that, and I've said this before, there is no easy route to do this. There is no way that's a done deal, that's a sure thing. All of this information that I'm providing today could be completely different than what someone else thinks. Someone else may think, nope, USA is definitely the way to go. But as I continue to talk here, and I've laid out some of the statistics that back why I think what I think, but a lot of it's also, as I said, going to be based on my opinion and what I see and what I feel and what I think is working for me. And that's really what it comes down to. So in that example, where it's difficult in Spain for me as a foreigner to break into a professional league, where I think the difference lies is the lower league structure. I think that is the big component that shifts those numbers in a foreigner's favor. So I can go into a 5th, 6th, 7th division team in one of those massive countries, or like I've started to do, maybe I start to take a look at some smaller markets, some Scandinavian markets, some Switzerland, Netherlands, Belgium, Portugal, some markets that still have good football and culture because, as I mentioned, almost everywhere in Europe, that's what it's like. But maybe there's a little bit more opportunity and there's a little bit more space for a player like me who can play at the level to break into the game. So I can start in one of those lower league teams because the system is structured to accommodate the supply and demand of all the players, both domestic and now as players flock to those countries to try and gain opportunity. It's what I did while I was in Germany, right? I had got myself a 6th division contract, and the hope was to do well and continue to climb the ladder and continue to climb the ladder. Because once you can establish yourself in the lower leagues, it's still not a clear path to the top, but those are the types of leagues that are being scouted by professional clubs, and you'll notice that that's often the trajectory of many players' careers that maybe don't start in academies right from the beginning and then sign their contract and then they're playing at the top level from the get-go. The players who move up the ladder start maybe in non-league football, and when I say non-league, I just mean anything that's not fully professional. They do well, they climb a ladder. They do well, they climb a ladder, and so on and so forth. So, America, lacking that structure, lacking that lower league structure, creates a hindrance now for a player like myself to be able to still pursue the dream. The NPSL and the USL League 2, they're not really the same setup that a European 5th, 6th, 7th division side would be. You're not playing all year round. You're typically only playing in the summer. It's kind of built for college players who are on break from school. And the other component of it is that's not where the top level teams are scouting. It's not where they're looking, right? Because I mentioned it before, and I'll reiterate it. Where are the top teams looking in the United States? They're looking overseas. They're looking in their own backyard at their academies, and then they're looking at the draft. So if you're just playing NPSL, and you're not a top player that's being looked at as a potential draft prospect, I hate to say it, but no one's really coming to watch you play. And so now it becomes you have to go out and you have to go to open trials and you have to network and try and get yourself a trial. And then, again, I've even noticed, and I've heard this from other players as well, that the MLS doesn't even scout as much the USL Championship, the USL League One, or now NISA. They don't necessarily even look for players that are already in the professional system, whereas you see it time and time again, players that are in the championship have a really good season, now they're playing with a Premier League team. They had a fantastic season in the Bundesliga SFI, now they're playing in the Bundesliga. Those types of things happen more consistently and more frequently, I feel, from an overseas perspective than from in the United States. And a component that is intertwined in all of this is the fact that in the United States we still do not have a promotion and relegation system. So it makes it difficult to truly gauge, one, what level each club really is at. We've established from a top 2 level standpoint that the MLS is the top level league, USL Championship is the second tier, but now we supposedly have 2 level 3 leagues. Even though NISA was just formed, it's now at the same level as USL League 1, and USL League 2 is below it. So that creates ambiguity and confusion, and it also creates a hindrance to the development of, I feel, some players. Because you look at teams, like, let's look at the Premier League, for example, this year. The teams that come up into the Premier League from the Championship and do well, for example, Leeds had a great start to the season. Who knows if they'll continue on in that same fashion. But Leeds comes out and they play incredibly well in the Premier League. Now they've just shown it clear as day that they belong in the Premier League, or maybe it's an and or, the players in that team belong in the Premier League. So even if Leeds then goes down, maybe the top 5 players or top 6 players from Leeds, they've established themselves in that league. They've proven that they can play at that level, and now they get signed by a Premier League team for the following season. Because of that promotion and relegation system, you find exactly where your true level is at. And it's another reason why I think Europe is so attractive, right? You look at a team like Red Bull Leipzig, who in a decade went from 5th division in Germany to now they're playing Champions League. Granted, there was an incredible influx of money and all those types of things that made that happen at a rapid rate, but that's always what you think about when you're in a European club, is you always have that motivation and that drive of, in 2-3 years, I could be playing at an incredibly high level, right? I look at some of the teams that I'm speaking to right now. There's this team that I'm speaking with, and they're kind of right on the cusp of semi-professional to professional level. And they're doing incredibly well in their league, and they're fighting for promotion. If I can go and be a part of that team now, get established, I can do well, they get promoted, I get to sign again, maybe we do that whole thing round 2, get promoted again. Now, in 2-3 years, I've just become a fully fledged professional because I've established myself in a lower league. I've built a rapport with a club, with a coaching staff, with players, and I've proven that I can play, and I make myself a part of a winning culture and a winning club that then goes on to promotion. I've now manifested a professional opportunity for myself without it constantly having to be me going on open trials in the United States, me playing NPSL and hoping and wishing and waiting. I can go out and try and make it happen for myself. All the while I'm doing this while I'm playing overseas in Europe, same thing as I did in Germany. I'm contacting clubs and I'm saying, hey, I'm playing in a club 1 level below you, which when you say that in Europe, it's crystal clear because there is a clear pyramid. So everyone knows if you're playing at this level, they understand what it is, they understand what it represents. When you still have that ambiguity of what levels are really what tier, it creates a difficult method of communication or really determining how good a player is based off of their level. Whereas Europe doesn't have that issue. If I say I'm playing 4th division in Germany, it doesn't matter what team I'm playing for. Now, granted, obviously there's going to be better teams or worse teams in a league, but that sets a specific standard right away. 4th division in Germany. Anyone who's in Europe, especially anyone who's in Germany, knows at least I have to be a certain caliber of player. The same cannot be said for the United States. If I say I play 4th division in the United States, that could mean, according to our pyramid, one of 1,000 different things. It could mean I could play with an absolutely fantastic USL League 2 side that is packed with players who are going to the MLS, packed with players who are going to be drafted and are super quality, or it could mean that I could play with an NPSL side who trains once a week and barely gets 13 guys to show up to game day on Saturday. Like, that disparity is so drastic, and that's probably why those leagues are scouted far less than their European counterparts. So that kind of touches 2 big points for me, just from a feel perspective, from an opinion perspective of why I feel like Europe is a better option for me. There is no promotion and there's no relegation in the United States. And in Europe, unlike the United States, I don't feel as if me playing semi-professionally or me playing in lower level leagues would give me the opportunity to get seen and get exposure and garner opportunities in the professional game. That's just not the way that I see it. I talked about this a little bit before, but piggybacking off of the idea of why we still don't have promotion and relegation, it's actually quite simple as to why we still don't have promotion and relegation in the United States. Because it ties back to the idea of we're still caught in between two minds when it comes to how to handle soccer. There are many of us who desperately want to go to the European style because they've seen it work for this game. And there are many who are true Americans, I guess you could say, and want to play soccer the same way that they play other sports. And I don't mean actually play the game, I mean the business side of things, right? So you have clubs that are franchises rather than clubs that are clubs. So what does that mean? That means that as a franchise owner, you have so much money at risk if you are to be relegated from the MLS. Obviously, that's the case across the board in Europe as well. The same thing happens there in terms of there's so much financial incentive for you to get promotion. Like you talk about, you see the numbers on how much clubs will make just by winning a promotion match into the next level. If you're looking at Championship and Premier League and things like that, just based on the TV rights alone and the revenue sharing. So that incentive from a financial perspective to get promoted or to avoid relegation overseas is just as prevalent as it would be if it were in the United States. But the difference is that they've, in Europe, have accepted that that is what makes the league and the system so great. They've accepted that it's a critical, crucial part of what makes them successful and why every game is competitive throughout the year. If you look at the NBA right now, if you're a bottom level team, you are now more incentivized to what's called tank, lose the rest of your games so that you can get a high draft pick for the following year. Which sort of, it creates this really weird and oftentimes not positive dynamic among sports, is that why should there ever be a motivation for you to lose? Why should you be rewarded for losing? The European system completely removes that from the equation. If you're at the bottom of the table, you had better fight like hell to try and stay up, because if you go down, you're losing an inordinate amount of money. And players are probably going to leave, and people are going to get fired, and all those types of things. Whereas in the United States, in all of our sports, if you're at the bottom, yeah, you're going to be upset because you're not winning, but then you have the reward at the end of the season of you're going to get a high draft pick. So, and just from a perspective of if you're at the bottom of the table in MLS and you know that you're not going to make playoffs, maybe now that allure of the draft isn't still there anymore, but there really isn't any, there's no fire, there's no passion for you to go out and ensure that you don't lose games as it gets close to the end of the year. If you know that you're out of playoffs, yes, every professional athlete comes out and tries as best they can whenever they play. But there's something different if you know that looming over your shoulder is relegation if you continue to slip down the table. And so the main point of what I'm trying to say here is that the United States have not accepted the fact that that is what makes the sport truly so great and what competitively incentivizes everyone to be at their best all the time. And the reason why it hasn't happened is because, as I said, the owners at the top with these MLS clubs, they know that if they get relegated, how much money they're going to lose. So it makes no sense for them as a business owner to take on a risk of that nature, because that's who really owns MLS clubs is business people. And why would they actively make a decision that could jeopardize their business, could jeopardize their financial future of their business entity? They wouldn't. Even though it's best for the competitive nature of the sport, and I hope that it continues to be pushed for, and I hope one day that we can have it, because I think it will, in the long run, be what is best for our country in terms of us playing football. But in terms of why I think Europe is better for me to try and go practice my trade, as I mentioned, that's a big reason why, so that's why I wanted to touch upon it. Alright, so I've talked about this in previous episodes, but I'll also mention it again here. Is that I feel as if from a style of play perspective that the European system fits me better, and obviously there's different styles and philosophies of play across Europe, but I think the majority of people over there that I've come across that play football, they really want to play football, and they want to. This is hard to explain. They want to play the game. I don't want to say it's the right way, because that's what's beautiful about the game, is there's a million different ways to play it. There is no necessarily right way, but they want to play a style that's technical, tactical, clean, crisp, sharp. They want to play passes on the ground. They want to move the ball methodically. Whereas in the United States, as I mentioned before, I feel it's a very athletic style. There's players that I've talked to that have played in the States that they say there's a lot of unnecessary running that goes on in the game in the United States. It's so dynamic and so fast-paced, and everyone's so fit that the game sort of becomes helter-skelter, and it becomes less clean, I guess is the best way to describe it. It sort of embodied a lot of what our mindset was from a national team perspective that you saw over the course of the past couple World Cup cycles. Our philosophy always going into the World Cup, right, was we're going to be disruptive, we're going to be athletic, we're going to press high, and we're going to try and counter. It wasn't we're going to keep the ball and we're going to impose our will on the opposition. It was oftentimes we were going to use the traits that we had as Americans to impose our will on the opponent. And so for me, what I've noticed is that it lends itself to big, strong, fast, athletic players. Now, I think that mold is starting to change. I hope it's starting to change. I'm starting to see some of the players that are being developed in our academies and are coming up through our systems, and I really like what I see, and I think 10, 15 years down the road, our landscape in the United States soccer system is going to be completely different, and maybe it would fit perfectly from a style perspective for a player like me. But the reality is that 10, 15 years down the road, my body probably won't be able to keep up with a young 21, 22-year-old who's technically sharp and his knees aren't 40 years old. You look at the national team pool now, the one that we just called in, and it's all players who are highly technical. You don't see those same big, fast, strong guys that we used to have, those just pure athletes that used to be on our team. You look at the Pulisic's, Serginho Dest, Gio Reyna, Weston McKennie, Tyler Adams. They all have a very different, distinct quality that is just really different than what we've had in the past World Cup cycles, as I've said. And one thing that you'll notice about all those players that I just mentioned, about the players who have that buzz around them for the national team pool, what do they all have in common? They play in Europe. So I'm not saying that I'm a national pool caliber player, but in the same sense, it's like if the best players in our country are going out and doing it, maybe there's something to that, and maybe there should be a reason that I go out there. Because part of it too is if I go and try my trade with the best of the best overseas, you know, if I can play professionally in Germany or Spain or Italy or something like that, that's going to make me the best possible player. That's going to develop me the most. And that's another thing that I look at as well, is to go and try and play with the best and try and play against the best so that I can become the best that I can possibly be. So that's one thing that I just notice and I feel from a style of play and how I play the game. What I bring to it and what I've done for clubs that I've played for, I feel as if it's been valued and it is a commodity that can hopefully start to get me paid soon. And that being said, it is difficult. Yes, I mentioned this before. It's difficult due to the visas. However, that upside and that path to go up, I talked about it before, that appeal, that opportunity, that exposure, that is where the incentive lies. So yes, is it difficult to get the visa? Of course, but there's other ways that you can make it happen for yourself if you truly want to pursue this game overseas. There's other ways that you can make that happen, whether it be student visas, whether you get a different job when you play semi-professionally, whether there's countless ways to make it happen for yourself. It doesn't always have to just be a club is sponsoring you to get your visa situated. And I want to clarify something as well, that I spoke a lot about the United Kingdom and England and some of the statistics and, playing over there as well. The other thing that I want to bring up is that this general term of playing abroad, it doesn't just mean I'm going to go play absolutely anywhere. Now, if I have an opportunity and it's anywhere, I'll absolutely consider it. But there's very specific markets that I've picked for certain reasons. Accompanied with all of these things that I'm mentioning today, there's certain markets that make it 1-2% easier for me to get my foot in the door. I went to Germany and started playing in Germany and realized Germany is a fantastic place for me to play and develop and grow, but Germany is cutthroat. Germany has millions of players who want to play at the highest level, and the highest level at Germany is so high. The Bundesliga, depending on the way you look at it, maybe second best league in the world. Teams from the Bundesliga are consistently in the Champions League final, semifinal, and there's a high caliber of player there. So I noticed, okay, this is a great spot maybe for a lot of players to start, but maybe this shouldn't be where I try and grind it out for the next 5-6 years. That could change. I still have opportunities there. You never know. I talked about England before. England, although I would love to play in England, England sort of unfortunately is a market for me that is more or less, I haven't really explored it. And that's for a couple reasons. One, Same thing is applicable from Germany in England, and maybe even more so in England. England is probably the soccer capital country of the world. Everyone plays football there. It is, by all accounts, one of the, if not the most competitive country to play football in terms of opportunities, in terms of the level. You know, in talking to players, they've said, you know, any Premier League team would, in my opinion, beat an MLS team. They said most championship teams would probably compete well or beat all MLS teams. You know, League One is maybe where you'd start to get, maybe that would be the level where MLS would really fit in. And you think about how competitive that is. And you think about how many good players are just in those leagues, and there's a reason that everyone flocks to England, because that's where all the money is. So, you know, that's not me looking at England and saying, oh, that's big and scary and there's too many good players. That's just me being realistic, and I want to play this game for as long as I can. I want to try and play professionally. So there's other markets where I can play. Coupled with the fact that England is by far, it's so difficult to get a visa, especially as an American, really now many other European countries as well, in England, specifically for soccer players. So I remember I did the research once, and I can't remember the percentage, but most clubs in England, the requirement for you to be able to sign a foreign player is that they have to have a certain number of caps with their national team. So they have to have a certain, I can't remember if it's a number or if it's a percentage of times they were eligible to be called up and got called into the team, something of that nature. And that's why you'll see even top level players will still have their working papers denied or visas denied to transfer to the Premier League or transfer to the championships or something like that. It is so hard to get into an English club. So that's sort of a market that, as I said, I'll always look at an opportunity if it's presented to me. If I get an opportunity to go to England, I might take it, but I'm not actively seeking out opportunities there because I know how difficult it is. So maybe I start to look at smaller markets, and I start to look at markets where it's easier for foreigners to get visas. And I start to look at markets where I've noticed other United States players have done it. That's a big thing as well, is can you find a roadmap that someone else has done and maybe follow some of the things that, some of the steps that they've taken. It's kind of why I started this podcast, right? I am showing other players some steps that I'm maybe doing, so you can watch from afar and say, oh, okay, he did that. Let me see if I can do something similar. Or he did that and he burned out or fell flat on his face, so let me kind of take an alternate route to that. So as I seek out opportunities, yes, I've decided abroad is probably the best option, but I'm also even more specific than that. It's not just the rest of the globe besides the United States. And, you know, I think the last two things that I'll touch on before I get out of here for you guys, I can't believe it's only been an hour. I feel like I've been going for longer, but, and I know I'm rushing through this, but I think I just got going pretty fast on this one, and this is all stuff that I'm really, really passionate about, so I enjoy speaking about it, and especially when I start to look at soccer more as a, you know, as a business as well, and as a culture, and all those types of things. That I just love talking about the game. So I apologize if I've breezed or, you know, just pushed through anything, because I was so animated and so interested in what I was speaking about. If, you know, anyone listens to this episode and they still have questions about something that I said today, definitely don't hesitate to reach out to me. But the last two things that I'll say is, first of all, I've laid out all these things as to why I feel like it's best for me to pursue a career in Europe, at least to start. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for me down the road to come back to the United States, but that doesn't necessarily make me happy to know that I have to leave the United States or that I don't want to play in the United States, if that makes sense. I would love to play in the States, to be able to play in front of family and friends, to, you know, be in a country where it's easier for me to work, I'm a citizen, to kind of have that pride of playing in the country where you were born and, you know, more or less determining that you're one of the top players in that country. I think that's something that's super appealing to me. And, you know, me making this decision is all about giving me the best opportunity to try and play and try and become a professional. It's not like an anti-America thing. If the roles were reversed and here was the best place, you know, if here had the same soccer pyramid and setup as the Netherlands, then I would be here. I'd be chasing the dream all over the United States. I don't want to make it seem like I'm bashing the United States or that I don't want to play here, or even if I had the opportunity, or, you know, sound bitter. I understand. I don't fit the criteria for what a lot of teams are looking for. Maybe I'm not good enough to play for a lot of the teams over here. That could be the case, but I do think there's a place for me in this game somewhere, and there's a place for me in this game at the professional level at a certain club somewhere in some country. And right now, I just feel like that country isn't, or that club isn't in the United States. Maybe it is. If somebody's listened to this, if you're the sporting director or someone involved in club football here in the United States, you have a professional club and you want to give me a shot, then give me a ring. But I'm just going off of what I know, what's in front of me, and what is best for me. And lastly, I think part of why also now the European dream has become so appealing to me is because it also affords me the opportunity to have these incredible experiences and to live a life that I don't know if I would have the opportunity to had I not been pursuing this dream. To get to go and live in other countries, experience other cultures, learn new languages, see new parts of the world and meet new people, that is an amazing added bonus as well. And it may be why even more so I'm pushed towards the European route. You know, I haven't seen a lot of places in the United States. There's a lot of places I would love to see, but the United States it has different cultures throughout the country, yes, but it more or less is one culture. You're not going to meet many Danish people in the United States. You're not going to meet many people from Norway in the United States, or Italy, or Belgium, or Thailand, or Australia, or New Zealand, or South Korea. Like, I want to go and experience new places and see new places, and because part of it for me is the adventure of this all. Part of it for me is getting outside of my comfort zone and flying to a new country and playing my football, yes, but also just doing something new and letting this game allow me opportunities to do things that I couldn't do if I was just here in the United States working a 9-to-5 job. You know, it allows me to travel and see new cities and see architecture and culture and food and just amazing things. And I've only done it for a little bit so far, and I want to continue to do it. And so that's another reason why I think the abroad option is so appealing to me right now. Is I want to have the adventure. I want to seek the adventure as part of this journey for me, and it's what makes it so attractive to go. And you know, it's not easy being away from friends and family and everything that you know, but to get the opportunity to play this game that I love, possibly for a living, and do it in a place where I can see something that I may never have been afforded the opportunity previous, that's something that's exciting to me. And for me, it's always about just what is going to make me the most happy. And right now, I feel like that is what is going to make me the most happy, is if I continue to pursue this dream and I can continue to travel. And in 3, 5, 7 years, or maybe sooner than that, I may wake up one morning and say, you know what? I've had enough adventure. I want to be closer to my family and I want to come home. And that could mean that I come home and I just pursue teams here. It could mean I come home and I'm done and it's time for me to start coaching, or it's time for me to start, taking on the next venture in my life. I don't know, but I do know what I know right now, which is that drive, that hunger, that desire to go out and still seek that adventure and still seek the development of me as a player, trying to become the best footballer in person as I can. I think me traveling overseas and trying to pursue a contract, that's how I check all the boxes right now. That's how I become the happiest me that I can be. And that's really as simple as I can put it, is that, I laid out everything, why I think it's best, but at the end of the day, it comes down to that sentence. It comes down to me trying to become a professional overseas is what I think is going to make me happy, and so I'm going to chase that. Might not make sense to a lot of people. I mentioned at the top that I get asked a lot, why? Well, why not come play in the States? Why not, move home? Why not? And I get it. I get that it doesn't make sense. I understand that. But at the same time, I just know that it makes me happy, so I can't, on the flip side of the coin, I can't understand why other people can't empathize and understand me. Which is why I loved talking to Khadif so much in the last episode, because anytime I talk to him, he just gets it. He knows. He understands. When I say, how I want to move to Norway or Iceland or something and play football, he's like, everything I've laid out in this podcast, he gets it. He doesn't need to even listen to this episode, because everything that happens in this episode, he'll just understand and have the same thought probably already. But I know for a lot of people, they don't have the same dreams and aspirations as me, and that's okay. That's why I talked about at the top. Everyone shouldn't have the same goal, but I just hope that in me sharing this story about me chasing my goal, that it can help you in some way, shape, or form get a little bit closer to yours. I think that about does it for today. Like I said, I know I was going a mile a minute there, but I really do. I really do love talking about these topics. I love talking about just football. That's why I have enjoyed doing this podcast, because it allows me the opportunity to talk about these ideas that I've had for a long time and for other people to engage with them. It also has given me the opportunity to talk to other like-minded individuals or people who have different opinions than me on the podcast as well. So with that being said, if you're someone who has listened to the podcast and you want to come on, or you want to talk about something, you have a difference of opinion of me, or you just feel like you have something that you want to share, or you want to chat football, then let me know. There's a couple different ways that you can reach out to the podcast. As I mentioned, we have our Instagram page. So I'm trying to post as much content as I can there. I know I'm not as on top of it, just because I am working as well, and I work quite a bit during the week, so I try and post as much as I can. But I am quite busy, so I do my best. But in the 11 pod, so that's in the number 11 pod, that's our Instagram. If you want to go and follow us on there, that would be awesome. Shoot me a DM, comment on some of the posts that I've had, talk to me about some of the ideas that you have if you want to maybe come on the podcast or something like that. The other way you can get in contact with me is through email. Same thing, indie11pod@gmail.com. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, do me a favor, drop a review right now and tell me something about the podcast that you like, dislike, whatever. If you're listening on Spotify, thank you. Keep doing your thing. If you are watching on YouTube, then hit the like button for me, and if you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. If you are listening on any of those two platforms I just mentioned, Spotify, Apple, or a completely different podcast, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, what have you, head over to YouTube and just drop me a quick subscribe button to the YouTube channel so you can consume the video podcast as well. It helps the brand grow, it helps the podcast grow, it helps all those types of things. I think that about covers it for the business side of things. Got a couple more interviews coming up soon with some pretty exciting people. I've got a couple more ideas that I have for solo podcasts and building content, building the brand, all that types of thing. And we're getting closer and closer. We're inching maybe towards an opportunity to start playing footy again. It's getting a little dicey because the numbers are going up again for COVID, and a lot of places in Europe have gone on lockdown again. But I'm hoping after the holidays, we're close to getting a vaccine. I'm hoping maybe spring 21. Maybe by summer 21, COVID will be a thing of the past. Everyone will be walking around maskless and vaccinated and healthy, and COVID will be ousted. I don't know. But in the meantime, wear your masks, social distance, wash your hands, and take this seriously, because it is really getting bad again, and a lot of people are getting sick, and a lot of people are sadly dying to this disease. So please take it seriously, and please stay safe out there, everybody. I appreciate you so much for being here with me. listening to this podcast and just being a part of my life. So thank you. And I will catch all of you guys soon.